Welcome everybody to the Now Magazine podcast with me, Phil Aston, and I'm absolutely delighted to have with me rock and roll survivor and superstar Dell Bromham from the band Stray, and also working hard now doing solo stuff, and also with the Verity Bromham Band. Is that still a going concern as well?
It is, yeah. It's really is brand new, almost by accident project, that one.
Wow.
Almost by accident.
Fantastic. Well, before we move on to where we are now, I'm going to just roll back the dial to, well, I'm going way back, probably to before 1970. And I'm fascinated by the fact that when you started playing guitar, which I think you were influenced by your brother to take up the guitar, you were in a band called The Traders. Is that your first band, was it?
Well, actually, no.
Oh.
Well, I had like school bands, like you do when you start, about 11 or 12 years old. And I didn't really have a serious band as such, And how long you got for this, by the way?
Yeah, you go for it. Go for it, Del.
It's in the book that you mentioned, but I almost got to play live by accident. I mean, for years and years and years, my brother had a band, predominantly a band, which was like a pop band at the time, a typical club band. Did all the songs of the time. The guitarist in the band was like Hank Marvin. They did all those Shadows tunes, plus the early rock and roll stuff. And of course, when we got into the mid '60s, when I was becoming a teenager, then obviously the music was changing. So they were introducing, like songs by the Kinks, Beatles, what was around at the time. And I think I was 13 years old. I mean, I'd had for years and years thinking I was 14. And then I was looking at some old photographs when I was researching the book, and I realized, hey, I was younger than I thought I was at the time. And one thing that amazes me, and it's when you write something down, you start thinking, how did that happen? Because bearing in mind, what you tend to forget is when you're young, when you're a teenager, anyone who's in their mid-20s seems quite old.
No, that's true.
It's really weird. And at that time, because my mum had me late in life, my next brother to me, Alan, was about 13 years older than me, 12 or 13 years older than me. So bearing in mind, when I was about 13, they would have been about 26 years old. So they were geezers,
Yeah.
A band. And I don't know, for some reason or other, the rhythm guitarist, Tony, he left the band. And they had a gig or two coming up because they used to work quite regularly, all the working men's clubs, weddings, parties, just what bands did at the time. And I thought, in retrospect, it was quite a bold move because I'd always used to I used to rehearse in my mum's little dining room, right? And that's the old council house, rock solid walls, quite soundproofed. When you imagine there's a group playing in one room and mum and dad are watching Huey Green and Opportunity Knocked in the next. So it was okay. So we used to play there. And as a little kid, my brother used to pop me up on the sideboard, and I used to sit there and watch my brother's group play,
Wow.
So anyway, by the time I was 13, I was, I could play a few chords, and this guy, Tony, the rhythm guitarist, left the band. And I think by what I can gather, it was kind of, what are we going to do? What are we going to do next week? What are we going to do? So my brother, and this is the interesting thing, turned around and said to the guys, my family used to call me D, not Derek or Dell. It's called me D. He said, well, D knows all the songs. How he knew I knew the songs, I don't know, whether he's just been very charitable. But as it turned out, I pretty well did. And I made my first public performance playing with my brother's group, The Traders, when I was 13, coming on 14 years old.
Wow.
At the Co-op Hall in Acton in London. And I think it was a wedding. And of course, it was quite a novelty because I remember all the kids in the hall, they would come over my side and they're watching their kid, he's one of our mates playing guitar sort of thing, And in the end, I stayed for a couple of years playing. And what actually happened was, because Brian, the guitarist, was more into the the rock and roll stuff, they sort of gave, where I started playing rhythm guitar, they started giving me the various solos. I remember one of them was the Yardbirds, Evil Hearted You.
Yeah, I know that, yeah.
Had the solo in it. So they said, all right, you play the solo then, because you're young. And then it was kind of, it's 26, and then it was like, they did Look Through Any Window, and it had a tricky, so I played that. So I played all the modern stuff, and I stayed with them for a couple of years. And what people don't seem to realise is that, as I've said in my book, you know, they used to get the average money was about £25 a night to play in a club. Divide that by 5 people. So I had mates who were doing paper rounds that were getting 17 and 6 or under £1. There's me getting £5 for one night. And if I did 2 nights, I got £10. Now that was as much of the average man's wage, perhaps even less.
Yeah, no, so, I remember reading that recently, and I thought, well, because when I left school, even in 1975, my apprenticeship wages were 16 quid a week. Yeah. So for you to be in the late to mid 60s earning like £5 a night, that was you were well off.
I was. I was. I said, things you don't realise at the time. You know, when I was writing this, I wonder why I was so popular in school, because I was the kid with the Vox AC30. But no, I mean they were good times, and also what it also taught me was it was almost like an apprenticeship, you know. Yeah. Because I mean, there was me as a kid playing in working men's clubs and pubs and things like this, and when I actually formed my own band, which were called The Stray, not Stray.
Yeah,
we were doing this. We were doing the same kind of thing, but ours was a bit more up to date than my brother's group. We were doing, you know, Motown, soul, R&B, pop tunes at the time, and even then, at 15 years old, we were putting some of our own songs in as well. But they all had that kind of soul flavour, because I think we were really mods really at the time. Yeah. I mean, we wanted to be the Small Faces or the Beatles, you know.
But you started to turn towards a more kind of rock feel, even by the time you did those demos for Pi Records, didn't you? Because I listened to those this morning. That's from 1968, and you had a proper rock vibe by then. So that was partly to do with we got two young guys, two managers at the time, and Peter Amott and Ivan Mann. And Peter Amott, he was a musician, and he was a drummer in a band called The Footprints, and they were kind of fairly well known in West London. They had a bit of a kind of a relationship with The Who, and they actually said to us, you know, you want to maybe try, and if you're going to do some covers, try doing different versions, you know, like Vanilla Fudge at the time were doing, you know, You Keep Me Hanging On. Yeah, that's right, yeah.
That kind of thing. So we did that. And I suppose with his influence, when I started writing some songs, they were veering away from the more, I don't know, soulful poppy thing. Because we're the first boy band, Phil.
Yeah.
First boy band. But it was getting that way, and it was purely by accident, really. And I suppose, like most things, we found we liked it.
Yeah. Didn't your manager feel that you were going to be the next Love Affair with like the Steve Ellis type?
Well, it wasn't. And no, this is how we met him. Actually, it was Love Affair were around, and I think the average age then was supposed to be 17 years old, and I think we were 16, and the local paper, the Acton Gazette or West London, put a thing in there, you know, typical corny things. They'd heard about us because we'd been playing at the Actonians Club. Yeah. So they came down and they put a picture of us in there with the heading something like, will it be Love Affair for the Strays? You know, and so I say Peter Amott and Ivan Mann were thinking about, perhaps we should look for a band to manage. And of course, up popped us in the paper, and they came along and saw us, and they probably didn't like every piece of music we were playing, but quite clearly they saw something in us that they wanted to develop. Interestingly enough, I was away at the weekend, and I met up with up for dinner in the evening with Ivan Mant, who was part of the management team, and we were chewing the fat about the old days. So, although we parted company, it wasn't particularly acrimonious in early 70s. Time's a healer, and we look back on those times very fondly and acknowledge our mistakes, because we were young when we changed management. We were only about 21, 22. And as a manager, Ivan was only about 5 years older than us. So we were just kids learning in the business.
Everybody was back then, weren't they, really? There was no templates.
I'm still learning now, mate.
Well, it was, I think, but 2 years later that the first Stray album hit the record racks, didn't it? Which opens with the song that influenced Iron Maiden many years later, or maybe even at the time, you went thinking how young Steve Harris must have been, and All in Your Mind. Yeah. And I mean, that album has got, you're very, very young, all of you, but it has such a rich mixture of sounds. There's elements of jazz, progressive rock, lots of complex time changes on some things, melody, soft guitar playing. Did you have, I know you've got to think how you young kids looking at each other in that recording studio, but did you have a plan of how that album was going to unfold, or were you literally growing the Stray trademark sound at that time?
It's a difficult one to answer because, funnily enough, I was having a conversation with Steve Gadd not so long ago, and what I can't understand is because we were such a busy band, we were playing all the time, and we used to break in lots of our new songs on stage, to work them in, because obviously prior to the album, we didn't have an album, so we just wrote songs and played them. And what I can't understand is I sat down one day and I started writing down songs we were playing at that time. And I said to Steve, I wonder how it was we ended up with the songs that were on that first album, because we had such and such, and we had such and such, we had such and such. And neither of us can understand how or why it ended up with those songs. I think All in Your Mind was almost an afterthought, which started off as a jam session in the school hall we were rehearsing in. And that was the opening track. And when you think about it, how if any record company person gave you a piece of advice, they would tell you not to open the album with the longest track. It's always hit them with the commercial one first, But we did that one first, and we recorded the album almost like we were playing live. Four of us set up. I think Steve may well have even had a live microphone, but we didn't use that take, because of the
spill.
But we, Gary Ritchie and myself played all the backing live, and I just added maybe a piano or an acoustic guitar and the vocals afterwards. So, and it was weird, really, because it was like going to work. I think we used to go in at 10 o'clock and finish at 5 from Monday to Friday, and hey presto, we got an album.
Yeah. And there's as I say, it's quite some complex tracks, especially the last track on side 2. The instrumentation. You've come a long way if you say that just a couple of years ago you were doing like soul covers and stuff like that, and pop stuff. This was quite complex music, for your, so, and you're all like self-taught and all learning as you went along.
Yeah. I don't know. I really don't know how it's just one of those magical things that evolved. We'd always, and me, I've always been one for the melody. And, you mentioned jazz. I mean, I suppose in retrospect, I would listen to all sorts of music, in our house, we had all sorts of music. But from a guitarist point of view, although I was very interested when the Yardbirds came along and listening to what Jeff Beck was doing. But I also used to listen to like the jazzers, like Wes Montgomery, people like this. So there's on the last track, the one you talked about, it's got In Reverse and Some Say. There's a little line in there, and there's also a song on Yesterday's Promises where I'm doing the octave things, which Wes Montgomery used to do. And I don't think there were many people doing that kind of.
No, I don't think so. It's also, I think it's an instrumental track. Is it To Move On, isn't it? I think if I've got.
Yeah.
And
that's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So, some of your playing is really gentle. It's really like this. Some of your guitar playing is really soft, and that's what made me think of the jazz players you've just mentioned.
Yeah. And then even, and funnily enough, I was always a fan of pop music, but I was fascinated by the jazz players, and then later on in the late 70s, by the time we got to the Houdini album, the kind of love for the jazz guitar, you had people like George Benson were becoming commercially acceptable.
Yeah.
But I was also listening to people like Al Di Meola and people like that.
Return to Forever.
And I know a lot of people around me were more listening to the rock, the rock guitarist, but I don't know. I don't know. Just the way I was, really. That's the way. That's what sort of it attracted me, really. It's all about the melodies. If something's unusual about it, then I'll have a go. And I never really. That's the other thing. A bit like Pete Townsend, I think. I never really considered myself particularly great guitarist. I was more like the rhythm player, or the person who was playing the song. So with one guitar, I was trying to do everything. So consequently, I might use my fingers for a couple of bits and pieces and do a little plucking, or I might just pick the plectrum up and do something. And that was the other good thing about Gary Giles playing bass with us, because he had a very unusual style, which he developed himself. Because when we first met as kids, I think he wanted to be Hank Marvin. He used to come around my house and he'd learn Wonderful Land. So I'd play rhythm while he was playing. Yeah. And somehow, I don't know why, but he ended up changing to bass guitar. But he had an unusual style. Not only were his left-hand fingers really fast, he ended up developing this style where he used the thumb pick there and his fingers.
At the same time.
So, he would be going, so it was great for me as a guitarist with no rhythm player. We could always fill the spaces.
Yeah.
But we also liked having the spaces, that kind of the contrast between light and shade.
Light and shade, yeah, the dynamics. Because on the opening song, like All in Your Mind, did you know at the time, because obviously it's been in your set ever since.
Yeah.
Did you know that was a song that was going to be popular live, or you road tested it? You just knew?
No, not really. Yeah. We had no assumption of anything. We were just told, well, you've got a record deal now. You're going to go and record a record. Okay, then we'll play these tunes. And it was, I know it sounds ridiculously naive and simple, but we never really had any illusions of grandeur. We just thought, we'll go and do it. We didn't actually think any one song was better than the other one, really. We just played. It was just one of the songs in the set.
Yeah. Well, later, I think probably less than in the 70s, bands it's quite normal for bands to make 2 albums a year, and you were definitely on that trajectory, weren't you? Because literally, very quickly, you did the next album, which was Suicide.
Yeah.
And that has a beautiful song on it called Nature's Way, which I know from a lot of my readers and listeners, they love that song.
Oh, right, okay.
Yeah. Was there a story behind that track? Was it because there's such great melodies in your music? People look back, and think, oh, Stray or another heavy metal band or a hard rock band, but you were so much more. There's so much melody and pop sensibilities and structure in your songs.
Yeah, with Nature's Way, I don't know really. I'll give you an interesting story. It was kind of influenced in a way by Jimi Hendrix, but not the Jimi Hendrix that we all got to know. Because in the 60s, going back to my sort of love of soul music and things like this, through the Spencer Davis group, I had heard, because I really love Stevie Wonder, he's my hero.
Great.
I got on one of the albums, there was a song on there called. It used to go, "Come back and take this hurt off of me, baby. Come back and take this." And I found out that this was a guy called Don Covey.
Right.
So I ended up buying. I found I think it was our local supermarket, they started selling ex-jukebox records. And one day I went in there and I found this other record by Don Covey. And I realised that, he had other records like Have Mercy, Baby, and all these tunes. And on every record, there was these lovely chick, 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 like understated guitar lines. It wasn't until about some years later that I realised the guitarist on that was Jimi Hendrix. So I was trying to be Jimi Hendrix before I knew it was Jimmy. I thought I was being Don Covey.
Yeah.
So when it comes to writing Nature's Way, I had this line, and there you go. That's what it was. It was I didn't really know at the time that Jimmy, even though Jimmy was big that in the 70, 71, I didn't realise it was him that played those tracks up. I was trying to emulate the style I was trying to emulate, so that was it. It was kind of the other thing that was unusual about that song was when I write songs, it's a magical experience. I can't really explain it, but normally the subject matter and the melody tend to come together, if not all in one go. Comes, it's a magic one. There it is. I'll take that out. But that one was really about the riff, and I think I maybe had something like, "If the sun don't shine," that's okay.
Yeah,
I think,
fantastic.
it's kind of the lyric is kind of about nature's way of explaining things, how it happens, how things work. Just I don't know.
Because also around this time, this is your second album, but you're a really young band. I can't think the only other band I can think of are probably your age band was probably Free on Island Records, but you were supporting like people like Spooky Tooth and Family and the Groundhogs. Yeah. And as you said earlier, when you saw people in their 20s, they were like older blokes.
Yeah.
But you're playing with all these big rock bands who had been around, well, not that long really, relatively, but for you at that age, it must have been. What was it like going on playing a place like the Roundhouse, wasn't it? You were the youngest band to probably play there at the time.
Well, funnily enough, you mentioned two of the bands, Spooky Tooth and Family, and for me, that was, as they say, a light bulb moment. I can remember watching Family. I'd never seen or heard a band like that before. And they were doing what you were saying, kind of integrating like jazz bits in there, because at the time they had Jim King playing tenor sax, with the violin and all the different, music merging. And obviously Chapo's voice as well.
Of course,
different. And they were on the same, we did the Roundhouse with Spooky Tooth and Family. And what indoctrination that was. I mean, and the other thing was, this sounds really corny, but we were about 16-ish, 17 maybe.
Incredible.
And I remember standing up in the balcony and seeing Spooky Tooth arrived. And I thought, they look cool. They look like a rock and roll band. And then when they started up, interestingly enough, and as I say, this was early in our career, and we were just doing what our manager suggested, doing your own arrangements of other people's songs. And Spooky Tooth come on. Not only did they look cool, they sounded great, and they had a couple of covers in their set, which they had changed.
Yeah, to their own style.
Changed the thing, they had a one on there which was Society's Child, which was a cover by, and I can't remember the name of it's a coloured lady who wrote it. Not Phoebe Snow, someone like that from that period of time. And I seem to recall, if I'm not mistaken, they did an unusual version of Eleanor Rigby. But they were doing covers, and it was almost like, I see what he means. I get it. We do it like that. So we sort of did that, and I went out and bought Family in a Doll's House.
Yeah.
And Spooky too.
Oh yeah, classic.
Spooky 2 is still a great album.
It is indeed. Yeah, classic album.
And then I went to see Spooky Tooth, apart from playing with them, because I just really liked them. And if I may,
yeah,
I've got an interest, a story here. Many years later, the drummer that's been playing with me, Carl Randall, in the Stray lineup for the moment, he was, just before I met him, he'd been playing with Greg Ridley, who, as you know, was the bass player with Spooky Tooth.
Yeah.
And went on to be in Humble Pie. Well, Greg formed a band, and Carl Randall, my drummer, was his drummer.
Wow.
Greg, as you know, passed away. And I got to meet Carl via another friend of mine, Dean Reese, who was also playing with Greg. And they were going to do or plan a concert for Greg at the O2 in London. And they asked me if I would go along, because I got friendly with them, not actually played with them as such.
Yeah.
But I'd go along and sing a couple of the Marriott tunes and, just partake in it in the gig. So I said, yeah. It was a great evening. But when I came off of doing my set, dressing room door burst open and there were two guys there. One guy I recognised because he'd been coming to a few of my gigs in the past. And the other guy was Luther Grosvenor.
Oh, Ariel Bender. Yeah.
Ariel Bender. So he sort of, they burst, this other guy said, oh, that was great. That was great. Luther Grosvenor, who I kind of looked up to when I was a 16, 17-year-old, said to me, where did you learn to play guitar like that? And the only answer I had was watching people like you, and that was it. I'd seen him play, as I say, with Spooky Tooth a couple of times, and the guitar licks he was playing at the time in Evil Woman, for example.
Yeah, Evil Woman.
The beat up Les Paul and a Marshall half stack, and it was great. Loved all that. And but that's what we were saying off camera, listener, is that you just don't know who's on the audience with, at times, and something like that is so rewarding. Someone like says that to you, and if only you knew I was watching you in the audience, but no, great. That's some of the most wonderful things about the music, sort of interweaving with other people.
Yeah, it's how the story unfolds, or the ripples just spread out, don't they, through life, really, and you just don't realise.
You mentioned like All in Your Mind with Steve Harris. I didn't, it wasn't until I met Steve Harris for some years after that he used to follow the band around. He used to come and see us play all the time, and he's actually said on camera and in writing himself, if it hadn't have been for bands like Stray, UFO, Golden Earring, there might not be an Iron Maiden. So, which is, that in itself is a compliment, but once again, you never know who's in the audience.
No, and Iron Maiden did a cover of All in Your Mind, didn't they?
They did, yeah. It was on the other side of Holy Smoke, their single.
Fantastic. Well, the first real milestone I feel for Stray, for my young guys at the time, was Saturday Morning Pictures. But that album produced by Martin Birch, he was also very new to becoming even a producer, wasn't he, at that time?
He was, yeah. That was in Delane Lee Studios in Kingsway, and I think they had Deep Purple and like that in there. But so this is 1971, but this album was such a step up. And also showing the versatility of the band, because there's so much going on there. You've got, P.P. Arnold on backing vocals and Lisa Strike, and we've got Jackie Brown?
All this. You've got Stackridge's violin player. It's such a grown-up album for you were still kids.
Yeah, we've been about 19 years old at the time. Yeah.
Wow.
But no, that was arguably my favourite period of the band, and it did seem like don't want to be a big head, but we did think at the time, well, this is the album that's going to break it. We're going to be big, and even in the press at the time, in the Melody Maker and NME, there were people saying that Stray, probably going to be the next Led Zeppelin, Black Sabbath, free. That was obviously visually comparisons because guitar, bass, drums, and a stand-up singer, but as history reports, it wasn't to be as such,
Was your stage act, because I know you were developing quite a theatrical stage act with lots of flash bombs and something. Had that begun at this stage? Was this?
We had that from about 1968 when Peter Amott and Ivan Mant took over. From that point on, and a lot of it was to do with Ivan Mant, who I said I met at the weekend.
Yeah.
He was way ahead of his time, and we. At 18 years, in 1968, so we were 16, 17 years old, we had the whole show going. We had lighting. We had our own lighting system. We had our own PA system.
Yeah.
We had pyrotechnics going off, bombs going off, everything. 2 years before we had the album deal. So we were scaring people to death a couple of years before. So we had a reputation for being a bit raucous, and in a way, it was a double-edged sword because some journalists did report at the time words to the effect of, "Well, they're a bit young, so they can't be that musically developed yet, so they probably have to do the pyrotechnics in order to carry the show," sort of thing, which we always felt was a bit unfair. We just wanted to entertain people, really, And the other thing was, I mean, if you ever saw us play, we were generally speaking smiling, or we were quite happy, and that wasn't cool because you had to look miserable. Yeah,
that's very true. Actually, if you look back,
and we did, we did find we were appealing to kids our age. We were getting our own certainly our own audience.
Yeah.
And that was great, and we were sort of kind of known as it sounds dead corny, all this stuff, but you're a people's band, they used to say, really weird, you used to get kids turning up, someone looking like me, I had sort of long blonde hair then, and I was skinny, and then, he looks like the drummer, he looks like the singer, and it was almost like if you was into Stray, you was in a club. My tour manager, Paul Newcomb, related a story to me. He's a couple of years younger than me. And he said he remembers when Suicide came out. In the Croydon area, we had got quite a following that way. He said, if you walked in school with the Suicide album under your arm, walk around the playground with it and into the common room, that you were cool because you're into Stray. Yeah. And he said, and that's another thing he said. It's quite funny. So I look back on my school days. He said it was like being in this exclusive club. You was into Stray,
That's very true, because around this time you also played at Reading, didn't you? You were supported with Status Quo. You also went to Europe with 10 Years After. So everything was looking really good. I mean, it obviously was, but then you had a change after going from Martin Birch with his perception of what Stray were all about. You then had a complete change of management and producer for the next one, didn't you? Which is very different.
Yeah. Well, it was. Ivan, who I met at the weekend, he was telling me more about it because we didn't really speak much at the time. Wilf Pine, who was a manager for Worldwide Artists. He was at the time co-managing Black Sabbath and sole managing the Groundhogs. And the Groundhogs had a nationwide tour coming up. And Wilf had noticed this up-and-coming band called Stray. And he thought, well, I'll get them on because I'd like to see them. And also he'd heard that we pulled good numbers in. So it was another incentive. By the time the tour ended, he offered us a management deal. And it was, I suppose it was just, depending which way you look at it, bad timing on our previous manager's part, because we were feeling after that, nothing happened. Nothing changed after Saturday Morning Pictures. We actually thought we would be going to the whatever that is, the next
level. Yeah.
And it didn't happen. We felt we were tied in with Transatlantic Records. We were young, our managers were young as well, and we'd signed a contract which was virtually for life. There were a couple of about 3 1-year options, but they weren't in our favour; they were in theirs. So it looked like we were never going to get out of it. And we thought that we're never going to get anywhere with Transatlantic Records. They were predominantly a folk label. And it just seemed like they didn't really have the wherewithal to take us to that next level that I was saying about.
Mm-hmm.
And we also started to think, when you're that age, people outside of the band start telling you things.
Yeah.
And they start sort of inferring you need a bigger manager and things like this. And it was just the right time, really, or the wrong time, however you want to talk about it. But Wilf came along and we thought, well, he's with Worldwide Artists, a huge company at the time. They had other big acts on their label as well, Yes, and people like this. And as the corny phrase goes, I made an offer we couldn't refuse.
Yeah.
So we took it. Ironically, I found out some years later that our previous managers were in discussion with DRAM and Island Records at the time.
Wow.
And when I think about, the stable mates we could have got with, but you can't turn the clock back.
No.
We didn't know. And it's funny, it's almost like that childlike thing whereby if they'd have told us and been more open, we might not have been so quick to jump ship, as it were, Yeah. But they were very much kind of, particularly with Peter Amott, he was very much the business head. Well, I won't tell you anything until I have it in writing, and so, but we never knew. So we took the other deal, and we thought initially it was going to be great. It was, being so young, we were told, I'm going to take you off the road, and we're still on. We got a pay rise, so we was on more wages than we had before.
Yeah, so you think that was good?
We did, and we thought we were living the life of rock and roll stars for 6 months because we were coming off the road. We were going to make an album. Your next album's going to be big. You're going to be black. Yours big as Black Sabbath this time next year. And it didn't actually go that way.
No, because Wilf actually started to change the sound of the band, didn't he? With brass sections and orchestras and.
You know what? I think it even surprised him. I don't think we were the band that he thought he was signing up. I could go on for ages about this, but I can always remember when we got the songs together for Madanzas, which is the album that he produced. He said to me, I remember him specifically saying, he said, when I saw you lot, I thought I was signing the new Black Sabbath. He said, but I think I've got the new Beatles. Right. And of course, with that, I think he went off piste a little bit, and he decided, I'm going to put strings and brass and all things. And there was certain songs that I wanted strings on. I mean, there's a song in there called I Believe It. And I had that I had an orchestral arrangement in mind for that anyway.
Yeah.
Because the Beatles name as well, once again, I wanted that George Martin kind of the big strings effect. And he said to me, we've got strings. He said, I've got a guy called Andrew Powell, and he was an up-and-coming a string arranger, and he had just been working with Cockney Rebel.
Mm-hmm.
And I was really struck by the first Cockney Rebel single, which was Sebastian.
Yeah, brilliant track.
And it had this really beautiful string arrangement on it, which kind of reminded me of what George Martin would do.
Yeah.
So when Wilf said, I've got Andrew Powell to do this, I said, do it. Right, okay. So I Believe It, I kind of worked with him because there were certain things I wanted to happen. There's a kind of a riff in it where it's like an A minor G D, but I wanted the bass line to be F sharps, like the cello. So and you've got this. So I wanted all that. I had that in my head, but he transferred everything that I'd asked him and more. So, but the only thing was, with regard to production, what I think happened was, I think Wilf was so keen to emphasize how different Stray are now, that there are some songs like Pretty Thing, for example, was a great rocking track. It didn't need brass on it. So when the brass got on it and it was mixed, a lot of it, and Come On Over is another one, heavy with orchestra. You can, for me, the arrangements on there drowned out the band.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah.
But once again, with Wilf, he was such a strong, shall we say, a strong character that you didn't really argue,
Yeah.
And at the time we thought, well, he must be right. Look who he manages.
Well, exactly. Why wouldn't you? You're still young kids. You're making an album. You've got someone that's from a powerful management company. He's got all these ideas. He's telling you might be like the next Beatles.
Yeah.
Why are you going to go? Well, let's see what happens. You're going to go with it, really.
It's exactly what we did do. Yeah.
and then you had the next album, 1974, Move It. He was involved again, wasn't he, with that one?
Yeah, I mean that was quite an experience, because he said, "Oh, right, we're going to go to America to record this." I thought, "What? Why want to go to America to record it?" We thought it was a great idea. We just went with it again. We never really asked many questions. As you say, we were young. We just, it's a bit rock and roll. We'll go to America to record an album. Other people do it. Why shouldn't we? And in retrospect, what it was doing was he was getting more involved with, shall we say, Americans with Italian origin.
Right, I understand.
They had the tendency for carrying violin cases around with them.
Yeah, with their violins,
And the studio was partly owned by these people. And but we went in there, we recorded the album. It wasn't at that time the most pleasurable experience, because Steve Gadd was changing a little bit, and he was writing more songs. Nothing wrong with that, but they weren't necessarily in the style that the band as a whole
wanted to go.
Right, and for me personally, I was having problems because I was writing songs. I've never really been sort of an I love you, love me, love kind of writer. I've always written about something.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a couple of songs in there, he really didn't want to sing them. And that kind of presented a little bit of a problem, because I never wanted to be the singer. I was just the guitar. I was just the guitarist who wrote the songs, And I think it surprised Wilf as well, because he'd signed up this band that were, Ozzy Osbourne, Tony, it was like guitar, bass, drums, and the lead singer. And then you find the lead singer doesn't want to sing the songs, So it did create problems, but we sort of compromised on it and made the album. And it had its good points, and it's that's a strange album for me when I look back on it. For me, I was beginning to think at that time, this isn't really going the way I wanted it. When we were such a together band at the time of Saturday Morning Pictures, it was completely joyous. Every day was great, and as time was going on, once again, a little bit like we'd been when we changed our managers. Steve in particular had got a different group of friends, and, it's just one of those human characteristics where someone always knows better. Yeah. So a group of people were telling Steve he should be doing this, he should be doing that. Yeah. And it didn't help at the time,
And so that was your last album for Transatlantic, wasn't it? Apart from the compilation tracks, which came out, I think, in 75.
Yeah. That's right, yeah.
And that, for people like me, tracks was how I discovered Stray. And it was a bit like Deep Purple's 24 Karat Purple. It was that 99p compilation that had all these tracks on it that made you think, who's this band? And that was the album that sent me back in time and then got me ready for the next one, which technically was going to be your solo album, but actually turned into a straight out, which Stand Up and Be Counted, wasn't it?
That's right, yeah.
I love that album, by the way.
Oh, you do? Well,
I do.
Well, thank you. I mean, that was a very strange time. It was completely new territory for us, purely because by that time Steve was really going in a different direction, and he'd written a lot of songs. And to be honest with you, I was taking a bit of a back seat on it, and we started recording the album in Majestic Studios, which over in South London. And very odd thing happened. I mean, we were working on one song. It seemed like every song we tried of Steve's to record, he would complain about something. And I can remember on this particular day, it was, me, on a guitar, just standing around waiting to move on, and we're not being allowed to. And I remember Richie almost leaping off of the drums, having been told by Steve how he should play the drums. And I'd already been talking to Wilf about doing a solo album, because I wrote so many different types of music. There was light stuff, rocky stuff, and I also felt with Steve's kind of usually like a new input now, not all my songs were going to fit. What I didn't realise is that Gary and Richie didn't really like the way it was going either. And after that session, I went home and I said to my wife at the time, I said, I don't think I can do this anymore. I'm gonna quit. And believe it or not, about 10 minutes after I said that, my phone rang and it was Gary Giles. He said, look, I don't want to be the one to say so. He said, but I can't be in the band anymore. I'm going to quit. I said, well, I just said I was going to do that. Honestly, about another 10, 15 minutes later, Richie phoned. I'm not having another day like today. I'm quitting. I said, hang on a minute. So anyway, we weren't recording. We finished, I think we had about 3 days recording. So we then decided we better go and have a chat with our manager, and explain to him what was happening. Well, he turned around and said he knew that because we were all so tight, we've been together since we were kids.
Yeah, of course.
He said, I was just prepared to go along with whatever you wanted to do. He said, but I have noticed that Steve is in a different sort of path to you. He said, why don't you carry on? And I'll take care of Steve. I'll let him have his solo career, and you carry on making the album. So, okay, what are we going to record then? Well, you've written some songs, haven't you, Dell? Yeah. Well, this was going to be okay. So we went in, and I think it was at that meeting where Wilf said to me, he said, I've had a great idea for a title for an album. Stand Up and Be Counted. And it's, I want you to write a song called Stand Up and Be. And it's the first time I've ever been given a title, right around a title. So I went back and I recorded Stand Up and Be Counted, which track. Must have been weird because we did Stand Up and Be Counted with me at the piano and bass and drums. Hello, what's going on? This is different. And because that was the other thing, right? Who's going to sing? Because we started recording. That was it. We started recording the songs, and I think we did that one and one other, and then we, as we usually did, went into rehearsal to rehearse some new songs. So I said, well, who's doing the lead singing? So Richie and Gary looked at me
and said, you.
I thought, well, hang on a minute. I'm not really sure if I'm comfortable about that. And I met through our driver at the time, our tour manager, a chap whose name was Pete Dyer, who by some quirk, some really strange coincidence, had been, because he's a couple of years older than me, he was the young guitarist in my brother's group before I was in it. And it was only when I went round there, has he got a brother called Alan? Yeah, I know his brother. And I've got to know him. And funnily enough, he had a band and he was playing a couple of Stray songs in his set.
Oh, wow.
So he knew some of the songs. So he came along actually, I've got to backtrack a little bit, because we did a show at the Fairfield Hall in Croydon. And we thought we'll try giving Steve, some fair saying, give him a chance. We said to him, look, people come along we were quite aware that people used to come along to see Steve because he was a great front man, but he wanted to play guitar now. And unfortunately, what he did was he was playing guitar, but spending so much time looking down at the guitar with his back to the audience, they weren't getting the guy they used to see. He was kind of, if history had been rewritten and we had been big, he would have been up there with the Mick Jaggers and Paul Rogers. Yeah. He was a great front man. And I was very aware, and that's what I wanted when I formed the band. I wanted a front man. And I was very aware that was missing. So we kind of persuaded him, look, we want you to play guitar. I want you to just go back to what you do so well. And he came up with, which is really strange thing, well, if I stop playing guitar, I think you need another guitar to back it up. We'll get Pete along for this show. So Pete came along and he played the set we did at the Fairfield Hall, supporting the Groundhogs. And I'll always remember, this is a funny story. We got on stage to do the sound check, and there was a voice from the darkness saying, Bill, Steve, Gary, Richie, can you come here a minute? So we went into the stalls, and Wilf Pine is sitting there. And he said, okay, who there is Eric Clapton then? Because it didn't cross our mind that we hadn't actually told our manager that we brought another guitarist in for the night. So anyhow, it was fine. He said, okay, let's play, let's have a listen. And it worked out all right. And of course, when we made the decision that Steve wasn't going to be in the band anymore, he was kind of the obvious choice. And he came along, and with all the songs I'd written for my solo album, there was a couple there that I wrote kind of at the time, because I thought, well, Pete's voice will suit this one. Because I'd seen him singing with his own band. So there's As Long As You Feel Good on there, I think, and a couple others. So I got him to sing.
Does he sing on the last track, the end? It's like two separate singers on that.
No, that's me. That's me doing the main vocal, and the other voice on it is Jimmy Helms.
Ah,
I've got to make you an offer you can't refuse.
Yeah,
because he was managed by Wilf Pine.
Because it's fantastic, that track is. The dual vocals is just superb.
Well, I mean, if you can imagine, I'd not been the lead singer, right? And so I'm now becoming the lead singer. And I said to him, I had this idea maybe that this other voice was like, like the little devil on the shoulder.
Yeah. Question and answer. Yeah.
And I was, because obviously I'm thinking, Pete, Wilf says, because it gets to kind of a little sort of, if you like, a soulful type.
It's really good. Yeah.
And Wilf said, why don't you get Jimmy on to sing it? I went, oh, that'd be fantastic. And then, of course, then it's like the embarrassment predicament. I'm standing in the studio. It's my sort of debut being a lead singer, and I'm sharing a microphone with the guy who's got one of the greatest voices ever. But he was really lovely, encouraging, showing me different things without actually telling me. It's difficult to explain.
Yeah.
What a lovely guy he is, Jimmy, and fantastic voice. I mean, it's a cliche, but he really could sing the telephone directory and make it interesting.
No, it's a fantastic track, and the other track that I really love off that album is For the People. It's got a great groove, great bass line and rhythm, and the guitar solo at the end is just it's sublime. Yeah, wonderful.
No, we like that one. I've been playing that one again recently, funnily enough.
Yeah,
I hadn't done that one for a while, but we resurrected that one.
Okay, and then after this became Houdini, which is, I think, it's another one of your favourites from your catalogue, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, my two favourite albums of the Stray catalogue is Saturday Morning Pictures and Houdini, and I think a lot of it, I'm probably not so objective as the listener, because partly is to do with places in time, as it were, And Houdini was a very happy period. I mean, we'd just come back from our first tour of America, and that was great, because for me, I felt really at home there. It was like I'd always been into American music.
Yeah,
we'd been, if you like, fortunate before we went to America, in that because we were quite well known in the UK, we were only playing like the hour and a half set. When we went to America, we were starting from the top. Starting from the bottom in a lot of cases, and we were asked to do 2 or 3 sets. So we were doing like a couple of hours, and we went back to how we started, learning something in the dressing room, learning something in the hotel room, asking something, and playing for 3 hours, and ended up, we'll give Bruce Springsteen a run for his money, we can do 3 or 4 hours as well. So by the time we got back from the States, with Pete in the band as well, we were really tight. When we got in the studio, it was probably one of the easiest albums I've ever made. We were so, a bit like the very first album, we were so well rehearsed that we went in there and everything was done in 1 or 2 takes. It was great, and so that's probably the reason, they were just happy times that I can reflect on,
Because you made basically 2 albums that year. You got also Hearts of Fire came out at the end of 75. Right. And then after that, because of the pulling power that you had as a band, the people who were booking Kiss for their first UK tour thought, we need Stray here as a support band to make sure someone turns up. That must have been surreal.
Well, it wasn't, because you've got to bear in mind is they were unknown.
Yeah, it was £1 a ticket, I think.
I mean, John Kerr, we were having a real problem at that time, because Wilf Pine got himself a real reputation for being the heavy man.
Yeah.
And I'd had various, he got involved with the Mafia in the States. I'd met people out there, and he was doing more business. I don't know how you want to explain it, but he was getting more involved there, so he wasn't really managing Stray at all. So we were on our own. I'd also found out afterwards, which is something else I didn't know at the time, that Pat Meehan, who was the main shareholder owner of Worldwide Artists that we were supposedly signed with, had sold the company, and he'd gone into films. So consequently, we thought things were getting a bit tough, but all our money was going into the office. But we were kind of floating the office, really. But with no sign of Wilf, really. He wasn't around very much. He was in the States a lot of the time.
Yeah.
And he had actually upset so many agents that not many agents wanted to handle Stray. I had one agent tell me, one of the agents say to me, no, we don't want to handle Stray because we'll get our legs, we've been told we'll get our legs broken if we don't get them enough gigs.
Yeah.
And with things like that, you get these stories, that get made up, and you get tarred with the same brush. And then what happened after that was, and I don't know if you're going to ask me, but I met up with Mr. Charles Kray.
Yeah, that was it. It's my next question, because I was just thinking when you were saying, well, we had a bit, a manager was getting involved with the Mafia. I thought, well, just around the corner was something far more darker, wasn't it?
Well, before I get to that, you asked me the question, but this is what I tend to go off at a tangent sometimes. But so basically, we weren't getting an awful lot of work in because of our management upsetting agents. One person who did believe in us was John Curd, who ran Straight Music, who had seen our pulling power when he'd put us on at the Roundhouse. You know, I look back on that now. I mean, we headlined there one time. And I was watching television a couple of years ago, I remember, and I said to my other half, I said, do you realise, I said, you know, all that in the 70s, we'd sell that out. You know, and I was watching like Paul McCartney or someone there, or Paul Weller, you know, 2,500 people. And you tend to forget, put it in perspective, we're quite a following, you know, at that time. Just needed that next thing. So anyway, going back to John Curd, he called me one day, he said, are you in town at all? I said, well, I can be. I can go that way. So he said, oh, I'd like to have a chat with you. He said, I've got this band coming over from America. Went into his office. He got a band coming from America. They're called Kiss, and they've got this amazing stage show, blah, blah, blah. And if you knew John, he's very sort of, he doesn't really enthuse much. And it was kind of, well, he said, I've booked them. He said, but I'm not sure if they're going to pull any people. He said, so I wonder if you could do the shows with them. And he actually paid us quite well at the time. Yeah. Better pay than we were getting for other. He said, I just want to guarantee I'm going to get bums on seats. He said, I know if you play, well, I'm going to get an audience. So I thought, well, yeah, okay. So Kiss, never really heard of Kiss. And first show we did, I think it was the Birmingham Odeon, saw them in the afternoon, and it didn't sound that great.
Yeah.
And then we were just about to walk on stage, and all of a sudden we looked up, and there's these 4 characters from Marvel Comics. Good luck, guys. Have a good show, you know. And they went on and did their show. Well, all the shows were sold out, and they were great. And despite what different people say about Kiss, we got on really well with them. They were really nice to us, really nice guys. And and this is to say, I've been doing some solo shows, and I sort of talk about things like this. Here's the irony. A couple of years before that, we had journalists saying, well, you know, they can't be that good because they have to use pyrotechnics and stuff like this. So Wilf Pine said, we'd made that comment to Wilf Pine. So he said, right, okay, what you're going to do is it's going to be straight. It's going to be all about the music. We're going to drop the pyrotechnics. So when we dropped the pyrotechnics, the same people were going back saying, well, you know, they're not as good now they dropped the pyrotechnics, so you can't win. And then, of course, we go and do this tour with Kiss. Guess what? They've got pyrotechnics, the bombs explode and everything. You can't win. So that was it. And then the same thing happened. That went so well. John called me again. He said, look, he said, you know, you did that one for Kiss. So I said, yeah. He said, I've got another band that's sort of unknown at the moment. I said, who's that then? Oh, they're called Rush. I went, okay. I hadn't heard of them either, you know. Offered us good money to do it. We did the tour. That went down really well as well, you know. And whatever happened to Kiss and Rush, by the way? Whatever happened
they did quite well.
Yeah, that was odd, you know. Bands together these days are much more, you know, we talk to each other more. In those days, we didn't really converse with bands much. But what I always remember was we were in the dressing room before, on the first day of the Rush show, and there's a knock on the dressing room door, and Neil Peart poked his head around the door. He said, oh, hi, guys. He said, just thought I'd come and say hello. He said, great to meet you. He said, I was in London for a while. He said, I used to come and see you at the Marquee. You never know who's in the audience.
Yeah, exactly. You never know who's in the audience, as you said. And then around a year later, punk arrives, and a lot of bands are seen as being old hat dinosaurs. But of course, you were actually younger than half the punk bands, weren't you?
yeah. It was a sort of strange irony. We were, because we were in around so long, we were just lumped in with them. But it was a culmination of things. You know, once again, it's the mismanagement thing. Because I mean, we'd Wilf had worked for Don Arden.
Yeah.
He was one of his heavies, shall we say. And he said, look, I haven't really got time to manage her. He said, originally he was trying to get his son, Don's son, to manage us.
Yeah.
And that wasn't going to work. So in the end, I found myself in Don Arden's office on several occasions. I got to meet Sharon. She was Sharon Arden then, not Sharon Osbourne.
Yeah.
I got to meet her a few times. I don't recognise the person I see on TV these days. Not the same little Jewish girl in her Laura Ashley dresses that I used to know. But she was nice. Got on well with her. So I've been there a couple of times to have the meetings that never culminated in anything. And then one day I was there, and one of the A&R men there was Arthur Sharp, who was one of the two singers in the Nashville Teens. He was the tall guy. And he said to me, guess who's coming in here today? I said, who? He said, Charles Kray. I said, you're joking. What's he coming in here for? Well, he's just coming out of Her Majesty's Hotel, and he's written a book, and he's been told by someone in the music business that Don might be able to help him. So the long and the short of it is, I'm sitting there, I'm about, probably about 24, 25 years old.
Wow.
And you have these stories about gangsters and things. Well, I didn't know. In walks Charlie, immaculate suit, sits down in front of me on the facing settee. And we've been sitting there a little while. And he was saying, what do you do then, boy? So, I'm in a band. Oh, yeah. What are you doing here? Told him the whole story. And he said, we've been sitting here for some time. He said, how long you been here? So I said, well, I've probably been here about an hour and a half or so. I said, but it's not the first time. He said, by this time, he'd been waiting 45 minutes. He said something to me like, I don't like being given a runaround. I know some people in the music business. Perhaps we should have a meet. And I'm thinking, then I end up turning into like Kevin and Perry in a Harry M film. I said, oh yeah, all right. And he said, yeah, I've got some people, friends in the music business. Now, I lived in West London. And he said to me, how'd you get here? You got a car? I said, yeah. He said, you going anywhere near Bethnal Green? I said, yeah, miles away from me. So I dropped him off at his mum's house in Bethnal Green. And after that, a mutual friend of ours, this guy was Laurie O'Leary, who was in the music business, and he thought it'd be a great idea to say that he was the new manager. So consequently, it made, I think it was nationwide television, it made the daily papers.
God.
But that was the kiss of death.
Yeah.
Because no one in the music business wanted to touch Stray because they'd already had this bad thing before. Frying pan and fire comes to mind. So, I mean, Charlie was very gracious. He said, no, she's not working for you guys, is it? And fortunately, we had a guy called Paul King, who we'd known from some time at an agency, and he did put some work in.
Yeah.
But by the end of the 70s, it was really becoming a struggle. And the last show we did was in December at the Nottingham Boat Club. And we didn't realise that was going to be our last show for the time. But it was kind of around that time that I started getting writs in and court orders and all sorts of things. And we couldn't get a show to save our life. And no one would touch us. And we just had so many debts mounting up, and the debts weren't even ours.
No.
I was getting bills and things in for truck hire, which was a joke because we had our own truck, car hire, purchase of cars, things that hadn't been paid. And then we found our tax and national insurance hadn't been paid for about 5 years. And they came after me because I was a homeowner.
And that was that.
So I was very lucky in as much as I contacted the Musicians Union, and they got me to meet an accountant. I mean, he worked wonders because there were no records of anything. The Worldwide Artists and our management company had disappeared,
long gone. Yeah,
and I was very aware that I had to be careful of what I said.
Of course, yeah.
Well, I mean, I was actually, it was inferred to me if I wanted to continue playing guitar, I have to be careful who I mention, so I still got the fingers.
Yeah, that's the main thing. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so that kind of ended that period of Stray tunes, really.
So then you're heading into the 80s, and it's like in the UK, it's the new wave of British heavy metal. So you've got Iron Maiden, Def Leppard, Saxon, and rock music in the 80s was going to really take off a lot from America. How was the 80s for yourself?
It was tough. I mean, I found myself at the end of the 70s, I had a wife and a child and soon to be 2 children. And I was absolutely broke. I had to sell virtually everything, all the band's assets were sold, and I was still getting the inland revenue, wanting more money.
Yeah.
And I thought, what am I going to do? I think I'd had an office job when I left school.
Yeah.
Which was only, I was only there just for a little while. So before I was going to turn professional and make it big. So I thought, what am I going to do? And it was sheer luck that I moved out of London and bought a house in a little town called Bletchley.
Yeah.
Which was, at the time, it's now part of Milton Keynes, but at the time Bletchley was just like a little Buckinghamshire town.
Mm-hmm.
And that was because I had met friends and I used to stay there for a couple of weekends. Didn't intend to live there. I was aiming to go more where my brother was living, which is more sort of Great Missenden, Aylesbury kind of way. Yeah. So I ended up there. And as luck would have it, almost a walk away from my house, Hammond Organs were setting up their distribution centre. They closed up in Belgium and were going to come to the UK.
Oh, right.
And I met up with Graham Sutton, who was one of the guys who used to repair Keith Emerson's keys and anybody who played a Hammond organ. So they drafted him in to sort of handle the Hammond organs, and I got a job in there. So for the first time in my life, I was doing a 9-to-5 job, working at Hammond organs. So I did that, and I was sort of doing a bit of marketing and and playing the organ occasionally.
Of course.
But in the meantime, I was sending tracks out that I'd recorded to various people, but I found nobody was interested really. I'd stayed in touch with a guy called Gordon Rowley. He was in a band called Strife that we played with a lot in the 70s, and I recorded an album with him a little later, as we may well talk about. But he had gone on to form a band called Nightwing.
Oh, yes, yeah.
They were doing quite well in Europe. And he said to me, we got a great little label called Gull Records. He said, I'll put you onto them. So I met David Howes of Gull Records. Rock-wise, they just got the first Judas Priest album, I think.
Yeah, that's right, yeah, Rock All, yeah.
So I went to see David, and he really liked the couple of tracks I had. Now, interestingly enough, we didn't talk about, it wasn't like the usual conversation he had. Oh, well, we'll make an album, or there'll be a single. So, well, come in the studio. He said, I've got a new young engineer that I'd like you to meet. So I think we work well together, which was Chris Stangarides.
Oh, yeah.
And so I got together with him and put three songs down, and Gull Records released a single called Who Do You Love? So that came out. So I then formed a little band to go and play some of these places. So sometimes it was the Dell Bromham Band. Sometimes we even called ourselves Oasis on one gig. How about that one? And then I went for a name Javelin, sort of thought, oh, we'll call the first album Javelin, Straight to the Heart, all corny things, corny stuff. But I found myself opening up for people like Samson and Crocus and all these people, and it was going quite well. And then I got John Sherry. He came along and he'd seen the band and he wanted to manage us and represent us. And and put an album on his new Valiant Records. Well, I must have run over a bag of black cats in a former life, because what actually happened next was I was summoned to the office, and they were basically, all the bookers and the accountant were chucking John Sherry out. So I said, well, where does that leave me and my band? Oh, don't worry, we'll look after you. But they weren't interested. Oh, it's a bit awkward. We can't really do that because you're with John Sherry. I said, yeah, but I haven't signed anything. So once again, I was out in the wilderness, and actually just around that same time, David Howells said to me, he said, you never recorded you said you was always a live band. He said, but I'm interested to see you never recorded a live album. I said, no. He said, why don't we get Gordon Rowley in to produce a live album? So they got us a couple of shows. Yeah. But that was an odd album. We recorded live at the Marquee. And that was a very odd album for me, because Pete was so disillusioned with the music business, hadn't picked up a guitar for
a while.
Since 1977, 78. And this was about 1983. They got together without me because I was out with my Javelin band. They got together without me, and then I suggested we do this album. But as I say, it's an odd one for me because I didn't sing on that album. You know, even the songs that I recorded, Pete sang all of it. So he was the stand-up singer. It was guitar, bass, and drums. So we recorded that one, and then nothing really happened. You know, people still weren't really interested. And it wasn't until probably about 10 years later that I think it was a guy called Pete Feenstra asked if we'd reform the band and do a show at the Riverside Studios with us and Man. And there was an agent there called Don Mackay, Rhino Agency. He was in the audience, and it transpired he was a Stray fan.
Oh, brilliant.
So we did some shows, and there were still little grievances from the past, you know, when we played. So it wasn't quite comfortable. And when the last show came, I think we was all happy that the last one came and went, and we decided, you know, that was enough. So Don actually said to me, he said, well, would you be interested in going out as like Del Bromham's Stray? I said, well, if you think it'll work. I said, but I'll have to check if it's all right with the other guys, you know. So I did that. They said, yeah. So I went out. Then they gradually, I said, it's a bit of a mouthful on a poster.
Yeah, it is, on a T-shirt.
So I said, you know, so Don said, well, he said, we've done the circuit a couple of times now. He said, I think we can drop the Del Bromham bit out of it. He said, because they know it's you anyway, you know, anyone who's sort of fans. So from that point on, then I started made an album, New Dawn. There was two live albums. We did a tour with Iron Maiden.
Brilliant.
And recorded a studio album called 10. Then we did Valhalla. So it's been rolling on since then, you know. It's such a shame because when COVID came along, it felt like by 2019 we were on tour and we were getting some real good attendances at gigs, and then COVID came
and stopped it all
and knocked it out of the park again, you know. So.
Yeah, where do your albums, your solo albums, fit in with this? Because they were going alongside, weren't they? Because like things like, I want to talk about White Feather, but Devil's Highway and 9 Yards, they were 2012, 2013, I think. That's very much blues, isn't it? It's blues rock, and your guitar playing is really suited to that.
Well, 2004 was an odd time for me, in as much as I'd had a lineup. A guitar, bass and drums. We were a three-piece lineup, and we just not long finished the Iron Maiden tour. And to my surprise, the two guys I had with me, Paul Watson and John Bootle, they both said independently, but about the same time, that they didn't really want to do any more with it. Okay, it's fair enough. So the blues market was in the UK was getting popular. There's a lot of blues gigs coming around. I don't know why that was particularly. And a couple of people said to me, have you ever thought of doing a blues album? Well, I'll be perfectly honest and say I was never really a blues man. I suppose you could say I'm kind of a second generation blues man, picking it up from, Miles Blues Breakers. And it's that. So then I know it sounds a bit, I was not analysing it, but I found that when I was going around to the various blues clubs, a lot of the bands on there, they were all playing the same songs or variations of the same songs. And I thought, well, if I do this, there are so many different styles of blues. There's the Chicago blues, Delta blues. I thought, well, what I'll try and do is I'll do a couple of covers, but I'll also write a couple in the style of more as a sort of tribute to those people, showing that, you don't necessarily have to be a one-trick pony, So I did that. At the same time, Leslie West, who I'd done a couple of tours with, had a solo album called Blues to Die For.
Yeah, great album.
Yeah, so my tour manager, Paul, said to Leslie, I think you should come over and tour the album. And of course, Leslie being Leslie said, yeah, I'll get Ainsley Dunbar to play drums. And Paul said, whoa, no. Just come over with an acoustic guitar and play acoustic blues. So he said, no, I can't do it. I've never done that. Now, I'm not saying it was down to me, but he said, well, Dell does it. He said, yeah, and he's got an album out as well. And I understand that the response was, well, obviously it'd be how much is it worth? That's what Leslie is. But he said, well, if Dell does it, I'll do it. So we did that tour, the Blues to Die For tour. I then started working on my next album, 9 Yards. And that was kind of, I just heard that my oldest daughter had become ill. So it was, if you like, in some ways it was quite a reflective album. And also in the wake of not really having a Stray band gigging an awful lot, there were other songs I'd written which kind of were a little bit blues, a little bit not blues, but just songs. Yeah. So I recorded that, and Peter Purnell of Angel Air Records sort of kind of heard about me, and he released the 9 Yards CD, and which went really well. And he said, Dell, he said, I believe you had another album, The Devil's Highway. So, yeah. So I went in and I recorded 6 more songs, I think it was. So there's The Devil's Highway now is a bonus.
I see.
Yeah. So that came out on Angel Air as well. He asked me what I did with Valhalla, so he released that as well, the Stray album. So that got me doing Stray shows again. And then there was a bit of a lull, because I was still on the blues market as well, doing solo stuff, and I formed like another little project called the Blues Devils, which is good fun. And then there was another little quiet period again. So my oldest daughter passed away, the one that was ill during the 9 Yards thing, and it's a funny thing. I mean, that song was kind of about, dedicated to her, the White Feather track. But it kind of, it's a bit like writing the book, really. It sort of, you get a bit reflective. So a lot of the songs on the White Feather album, if you like, they're soulful, and I mean that they're coming from the soul. And also lyrically, they're about life, and also songs like not necessarily. I said to someone recently, I said, if I was sort of maybe born in the 15th or 16th century, I might have been a wandering minstrel, telling stories as the third party. I write these songs, even going way back to Stray times. I sometimes write about a subject. It's the subject matter. It might not necessarily be my opinion, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So it was kind of with the White Feather, because of what had happened. It was kind of all about life, really.
I think I was playing the White Feather a lot this week, and my wife Sue was listening, and she said, "Oh, this is a beautiful record." And I said, "Oh, this is a very recent one by Dell." And I think it's got some of your best vocals, best guitar, best. I think it's a brilliant album, and I think it's important for anyone who discovers this podcast in years to come that we start to think, when we think of an artist like yourself, Dell, who's got such a rich heritage of music, is that we always look backwards, but actually this album, and as you say, it's very reflective, of what's gone on in your life. I just think it's up there with anything you've ever done. I think it's superb. I really do.
Thank you very much. No, it was almost like a bit of a life's ambition as well to do that. I didn't really realise it at the time until I got in the studio. I'd known Jamie, who was the engineer, for some time, and he was definitely on the same sort of plane as me. He knew exactly what was what and how we were going to approach each song, and that was it. If you like, not every song is the same style of music, but
they all connect, don't they? They all the way it's sequenced. Everything about it is just complete.
That's what I sat and said. I want. We jiggled the songs around. I said, I want this one to run into that one, and that one to that one, because that's the reason why that one is written. And it does kind of tell a story, very loosely. But no, I wanted to have a theme. But once again, it's me harking back to the Beatles days, really, because Stray were often criticised as an example of if we had a criticism of the time. I mean, I didn't really necessarily agree with it, that we were too diverse, because bands always tend to, journalists like to put things in bags.
Yes.
And I always said, well, you got a Beatles album, you got a bit of everything on it, because a song is a song, and hopefully that any song I've written will last longer than I'm around, because they stand the test. Who would have thought when I was kids at school, when there was the Beatles records on, that I always remember when my daughters were growing up, they came home and they were saying, we've been singing Yellow Submarine.
Yeah.
Today, and it's just the power of song, the power of words, and no, I was really pleased with that. Probably going back to the Beatles again. I'm sorry to keep harking on it. One of the best reviews I got was from a journalist, and incidentally, thank you for your words regarding White Feather. I really do appreciate it, because they're like your babies. You put them out there. You put them out there. You don't know if they're going to get trampled on or liked, But this journalist said of White Feather, he said something to the effect of, this is almost like listening to the Lost Beatles album. And when I read that, I thought, wow, I couldn't get a better compliment than that. No. But no, I was going to say something else, but I lost my thread there. But there you go.
No, it's great. So now you've got your autobiography coming out, Rock and Roll Survivor, and I think you're selling that at your gigs. Are you? Is that?
Well, the gigs are a bit few and far between at the moment, because that's another long story. You've got the new Stray album ready, which will probably be called Survivor. And the opening track on the album is called I Am. Now, that's a weird one, because in another world, that would have probably been a track off of a solo album.
Yeah.
Purely because it's called I Am, and it's really about being a rock and roll survivor. And hopefully I wrote it thinking that musicians like me would kind of appreciate that if you're going to maintain yourself, business, whatever you call it, in the music, you've got to be strong, and one of the lines of the song is, I'm a lion, I'm a tiger, I'm a rock and roll survivor, sort of thing. And it was all going to tie in nicely with the album release and all this sort of thing. But my tour manager, who was discussing an album deal with a label. Tragic thing happened before he decided to get cracking on it. He decided to take his wife away for a short break to Spain. While she was there, she had a brain aneurysm.
Oh dear!
And she's been in a coma for the last 7 months. She's back home now, but it's not looking good. So consequently, by the time he got around to talking to the people, situations had changed. Post-COVID, well, we've decided we're not going to sign up anything at the moment. We want to see how. So that's not going to happen. So we haven't actually been doing the shows because we wanted to save the shows until next year to promote the album.
Right. So
we are in the process of talking to somebody at the moment. So what we intend to do is to do that. So what we've done at the moment, it's out on Weimar Press, Weimar Publishing. You can actually we've done a limited edition on hardback, so all autographed. So you can get them from Weimar Publishing.
Okay.
They're online, Weimar. Well,
I'll put it in the description. Weimar Publishing. I'll stick the link in.
And we've also got it on my website as well. I'll send you a link that you can paste afterwards.
So where's for the best place for people to get find you by your CDs and your book is what's the best website to go to?
Well, with the CDs as well. I mean, most everything now is available on all the usual outlets like Amazon stuff.
Amazon,
but you can contact our Stray website and my solo website, and also Weimar Publishing is doing the book as well, but they're signed copies at the moment, and
fantastic.
We will be getting some shows in, but it'll be for 2023 now. I've actually got some other shows lined up with John Verity.
Because that's John Verity, who was in Argent when he replaced Russ Ballard, wasn't it? Yeah.
Well, I've known him for some time, and our paths have crossed various shows and things, and it was. Peter Barton of Rock Artist Management. He said to me, you two should get together and do some stuff. I said, well, what do you mean? So he said, well, you're not doing an awful lot with Stray at the moment. He said, you should do some songs. What are you talking about? He said, you should do some covers. I said, I see a band down the road doing covers. He said, no, he said, you don't get it. He said, people would like to be interested to see how you would take on something. So he had this word with John, and John phoned me up. Yeah, I've had Pete Barton phone me up. I said, he came back and he offered us a couple of shows, good ones, good shows. So we had a rehearsal which went really well, just me and him, and we've done a couple of shows so far, and it went great. And we've got quite a few in for next year.
Brilliant.
So it's the Verity Bromham Band, How about that for really straining to find a name, isn't it?
Yeah, but it'll fit on a T-shirt though, better than Del Bromham's Stray.
John has created a really nice logo, VB. Yeah. That looks very, very nice. But right. No, there will be some Stray shows, and I'm going to be doing some solo shows as well. And the book will be coming out, I think, in March
on paperback.
On Amazon and Waterstones and all that, and I'll probably be doing the rounds on that as well.
Well, that's fantastic. So we've got a new Stray album to look forward to called Survivor. Yeah. We've got the Del Bromham Band, your solo stuff. You've got the Verity Bromham Band shows. Yeah. You've got your book. So 2023 is looking like it's going to be a great year.
Well, I think it could be. I mean, we're both, myself and Paul Newcomb, my tour manager, we're both very optimistic that, hopefully now we are out of COVID. The problem is promoters getting their confidence back to book shows. That's one of the main stumbling blocks at the moment. So as soon as we've got the album and all that, we'll be out there again. I don't know what else I could do really.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Del. Thank you so much for your time today. It's been absolutely fantastic. And as I say, if anyone watching and listening, there's a whole ton of music to explore if you're new to Stray and Del's albums. But I really recommend White Feather as just as good a place to start as those classic Stray albums from the 70s. So best of luck, and hopefully I'll talk to you again soon. And thank you everyone for watching, and don't forget to subscribe to nowspinning.co.uk, and I shall see you all on my next podcast. Thank you.